What if I told you that over the past 50 years or so, there has been a group of Americans killed, and that they have been killed at a rate of about 1 million per year? Also, this group of people is the most helpless of Americans. Of course, what I'm talking about is the unborn children in this country killed due to abortion. Welcome to this podcast. I recognize that I sent an invitation to those of you who are pro-choice to come listen to the pro-life arguments that I will put forward. Just you showing up is huge, and I'm very thankful that you've decided not to let a political party or a class of people think for you, but instead you have decided to think for yourself. Listen to my arguments, and where I go wrong in your view, tell me. But I also think that you should seek the truth, and maybe today you can have a better understanding of where that is, whether it be with your position or mine. I am reading from a script. If you're watching on YouTube, you could probably tell this already. I'm reading from a script because I would like to not let my emotions get the best of me, and let's face it, in any given scenario, I'm more likely to just ramble on without one. So I value your time. I appreciate you coming here to listen, so I will not waste it. First, I will address the obvious concern that I am a young man. I can't relate to the experience of women. However, a moral truth is right. A moral truth is right, independent of whatever gender is proclaiming it. Plus, if you would just rather hear these arguments from women, then I'll have multiple videos linked in the description. Also, many of you may know that I am a Christian, and that much will be obvious at the end of the podcast, but I tell you the truth when I say that I became pro-life a couple years before I became a Christian. Pro-life versus pro-abortion is not a religious debate. In fact, I will not make any appeals to religion in this podcast whatsoever. I'll give you a little overview before we get into it. First, it seems we should establish whether an embryo or a zygote is a life or not. I'll use scientific and philosophical arguments to prove it is a life. Next, I would like to refute some commonly used pro-abortion arguments. Then, I'd like to shine some light on the abortion industry itself. These arguments aren't exhaustive by any means, but I think they are quite solid. Most of these were thought of by people who have come before me. When I was becoming pro-life, I subjected these ideas to scrutiny, and I challenged them, but after doing so and thinking through them on my own, I've come to see that a lot of them are true, and I agree with them. And in fact, I'll even be sprinkling a little bit of my own arguments in here as well. I'm just spreading these ideas in hopes that at least a few of you may change your mind about some things. I will, if I may speak candidly for a brief moment. It's important to know that I'm not expecting anybody who is pro-choice listening to this. I'm not expecting you to convert by the end of this podcast. I remember when I was coming to decide this, it took me quite a while. It was through the exposure of multiple arguments over time, and just sort of experiencing life in new ways until I was fully convinced. I just ask that you have an open and honest mind, open and honest heart, and like I said before, if you disagree, if you think I'm wrong, tell me. Okay. And I will also sprinkle in bits of me drinking water, because speaking for an entire podcast without water is hard. Okay, let's get into it. So, you're still here. Great. It seems that many endless debates have been had over abortion that never got anywhere because the parties involved couldn't agree on where life begins. Well, a man named Steve Jacobs surveyed over 5,000 biologists to see when human life begins. He reported something astonishing. He said, quote, "I found that 5,337 biologists, 96% of the sample size, affirmed that a human's life begins at fertilization, with 240, 4% of the sample size, rejecting that view. The majority of the sample identified as liberal, 89%. 85% identified as pro-choice, and non-religious, 63%. In the case of Americans who expressed party preference, the majority identified as Democrats, 92%. So what that means is, if you read his study, and I'll link it in the description below, he surveys biologists across the world, and he said just the Americans that he surveyed, he asked their political party preference. That's what that means. What's interesting is that 85% of those surveyed were pro-choice. So this means that their answer to the question of the beginning of life would go against their pro-choice positions. Sorry, this is me speaking now, not Jacob's. I'll say that again. What's interesting is that 85% of those surveyed were pro-choice. So this means that their answer to the question of the beginning of life would go against their pro-choice positions. That's even more reason to believe their statements. The statements go against their political ideology. If you want some more clarification on why it's more plausible to believe that, let me know. Comment, whatever you feel you need to do. The discussion later might explain how it's still easy to be pro-abortion, even in light of this fact that scientists affirm that life begins at fertilization. I know much more could be said on the science of this. I'm not much of an expert, and I know I said I'd use science, but I technically just cited a bunch of scientists. I'll let the experts do the talking. Experts that say these truths are committed to these truths no matter what their political preference. But even if the science was inconclusive, I think philosophically we could still arrive at the same conclusion, that life begins at conception. So I think that we would all agree that a human being has inherent value. And part of that human value includes things like a basic right to live, equality, etc. Inherent means something permanent and in and of itself. Therefore, it cannot be taken away or gained, because if it's gained, it was never in and of itself. So you have this inherent value now. Right now, you do, the listener. You have this value now. And you did 1 year ago. Now rewind to 10 years ago. Of course, you had this value, even then. Now rewind to the day you were born, or even 10 minutes after you were born. Did you magically not have it and then gained it? You simply take a baby from being located in the womb and then it is transported outside of the womb. What changed? Of course, nothing except location. You still had that value. The thing is, too, you don't just magically get this value at a random point in the pregnancy. This is why it's totally arbitrary to only allow abortion for some part of the pregnancy. It needs to be for none of it, and here's 2 reasons. The first is that biologists overwhelmingly affirm that life begins at conception. The second is that what is the difference between a developing baby at 20 weeks and 21 weeks? Well, only about a few thousand cells or more maybe? I'm not sure the exact number, but just humor me for a second. But did the addition of a certain amount of cells suddenly grant a value to human life? This principle applies to all stages of pregnancy as well. Like imagine saying, a 12-week child in the womb has a few thousand cells. Again, I don't know the exact number. But then because it's at 11 weeks and has, say, a few hundred less, then it's okay to abort it because it doesn't have the inherent value. It's like, does lopping off my arm somehow degrade my human value? No, I have much less cells, millions less actually, but I still have the same inherent value. So I think this makes a solid point that a developing baby in the womb possesses inherent human value, which includes the right to life. But you might dig your heels in the sand and say, a fetus is not a life. just potential for life. Even then, abortion is still wrong. Matt Walsh, a political commentator, makes this great point. It's like if you win the lottery and you're walking with the winning ticket to the lotto, and you're walking with the winning ticket to the lotto to get it confirmed. But out of nowhere, someone runs up to you and rips up the ticket. Then the mugger says, it wasn't actually $10 million. It was the potential of $10 million. So ripping it up actually doesn't matter. You clock him right in the face, and you'd be justified to do so because you recognize that that ticket is still worth $10 million. Similarly, even if a fetus is a potential for life, which I have already argued that it's not, you're still not justified in aborting it. If you need clarifications on that analogy, please let me know. I'm willing to do so. Okay, now we have seen that life begins at conception and that the developing baby possesses inherent human value throughout the pregnancy. But you may still think that these facts still aren't enough to stop abortion. I do, but you may not, so I'll continue. Now, there are a number of pro-abortion arguments that are very bad, so much so that they sound very similar to pro-slavery arguments. I know this is controversial in this day and age, but it's true. Again, Matt Walsh makes another observation. Here are multiple arguments for abortion that echo arguments for slavery. The argument from ownership, quote, "Oh, this slave/baby is my property/body. You can't tell me what to do with it." Argument from privacy. "No one is forcing you to have slaves/abortions. Mind your own business." Argument from superseding rights. "My property/body rights come before the rights of a slave/fetus." Argument from inevitability. "Slavery/abortion has been around for thousands of years. It's never going away. We might as well have a safe and legal system in place for it." Argument from pseudoscience. "Slaves/fetuses aren't really people. They aren't like us. Look at them. They're physically different. Therefore, we are human and they are not." Argument from socioeconomics. "If slavery/abortion ends, most of these slaves/babies will end up on the streets without a job." Argument from the courts. "Slavery/abortion was vindicated by the Supreme Court. It's already been decided. There's no point in arguing it." Argument from the Bible. "Slavery/abortion isn't specifically condemned in the Bible. If it's wrong, Jesus would have specifically said so." And allow me to insert, if you are a Christian listening to this and pro-choice, that is a different discussion to be had. I'll continue. Argument from faux compassion. "Slavery/abortion is in the best interest of Africans/babies. The world can be a cruel place. It's best to protect them from it by keeping them enslaved/killing them." Argument from the assumed hypocrisy of the other side. "You say you want to end slavery/abortion, but you don't want to live with freed blacks/adopted unwanted babies yourself. Therefore, your position is invalid." Okay, these are many arguments that pro-abortion advocates make, and I think phrasing it, not really phrasing it that way, pro-abortion advocates say that. And the fact that they echo slavery is quite trembling. And I know if you're pro-choice, especially if you're ultra-liberal, here I am speaking candidly again, I realize that you're probably very frustrated at me for just making that comparison. But imagine how frustrated I am when I see abortion happening. But I'll continue. I do want to spend a moment on the argument from privacy that I previously mentioned. If the echo of the pro-slavery argument doesn't show that it's wrong, let me add another angle. Now, just to remind you, the argument from privacy is, no one's forcing you to have an abortion, so mind your own business. So here's another angle. A lot of people use this one. It's important to address it. People will say, stop forcing your beliefs onto others. The problem is that that is a self-refuting statement. That statement, stop forcing your beliefs onto others, is a belief. You believe that someone shouldn't force their beliefs onto others, and by yelling it or typing it at people, you're now forcing that belief onto others. You see how it's self-refuting? Here's another angle to it. Also, morally evil acts such as abortion oblige a third party to step in to stop them. Take this thought experiment. Imagine a psychotic woman just gave birth to her baby, and for the sake of the thought experiment, it was only you, her, and the baby in the room. If she said, I'm going to choke my baby to death, and proceeds to do so, you would be obligated to try to stop her. Maybe not legally, but morally, you would be obligated to. If you didn't, this is compliance. I've seen many pro-abortion people say that silence is compliance to evil, or something along those lines when talking about other topics. But applied to abortion, they forget it. What changed from the baby just being born? If the baby was born an hour earlier, it'd be just as healthy. Under abortion, 10 seconds after birth, intentional killing of the child, or excuse me, I misspoke. Apologies. Under abortion, 10 seconds before birth, intentional killing of the child is okay, but as soon as it's born, people object to it. Did its location somehow make it wrong? Of course not. It was wrong the entire time. That's what I'm getting at. So the mind your own business argument doesn't cut it, not even close. At this point, the pro-abortion person may say, well, isn't forcing a woman to carry a baby to term like forcing a slave to work? This is quite faulty. It's not about the woman's body because the child in her womb is not her body. Biologists already say it's a life, but think about it. If a fetus was the woman's body, then the woman would technically have 2 hearts, 4 arms, and so on, but she doesn't really. Also, the child in the womb has the potential to grow, and once born, it will still grow. But my arm can grow when I grow, but if I remove it, it will cease to grow. I think these 2 cases show that there is another body inside of the woman, so it's not my body, my choice. It's also nobody forcing her. No one's forcing her. As a society, we agree that parents are legally and morally responsible to provide for their children. If there's evidence that children are being starved in a household, being abused, severely neglected, etc., then CPS comes in and the parents are arrested, and we all agree that that is the right thing to do. Also, wouldn't you be repulsed if you saw a woman just taking a bunch of drags off cigarettes and slamming alcohol when she's clearly pregnant? Of course you would be, and rightfully so. The thing is if you say it's her body, her choice, logically you have to admit that it's okay to smoke and drink while she's pregnant. Logically. Because well, sorry, I'm speaking candidly again. I won't go into it. So it's not really just a woman's body, right? And a mother has a moral and legal obligation to provide the basic needs of a child. Now you might say, okay, it's a life and the baby isn't the mother's body, but there still isn't a legal obligation to allow her body to be used by the child. Of course, this is where the pro-choice analogy of the famous violinist is made. This was made popular by Judith Jarvis Thompson. It goes like this. Suppose you wake up one day and at your surprise laying in a bed hooked up to a bunch of wires. Those wires are hooked up to a world-famous violinist who became sick and needs to use your body to get back to health, or he or she will die. You are the only person that is compatible with him or her. Don't worry, it will only be for 9 months. You would be justified to pull the cord and walk out. You would be. But this analogy is supposed to show that a woman must consent to the pregnancy, and if she doesn't, then she can just pull the cord. The issue is that this analogy doesn't hold true to the abortion debate because it assumes that you had no say in getting pregnant, which of course you did. See, this is a big problem with the abortion debate, which is, I shouldn't have to live with my consequences thinking. Now, sex does two things. It binds people physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and it also makes children. Newsflash. Every single time you have sex, you are surrendering to the chance that a pregnancy may occur. This is like playing baseball in the neighborhood and recognizing that you might break a window. You could say, oh, well, I took birth control and I wore protection, but even those aren't 100% and they say so on the packaging. You can face the batter in the right direction to hit out into the street, but he could still hit a foul ball into a window. But the ball players are rightly held responsible. Likewise, you're still responsible for the pregnancy. It's also the same reason why men are held responsible for child support if the child is theirs. If they say, oh, I didn't consent to my sexual partner getting pregnant, so I'm not going to pay child support, you'd laugh in his face and the judge would say, all right, pay up. And that's how it should be. You might also say, well, a woman is not legally obligated to donate an organ to her child, so why should she give up her body to the child? This seems formidable until you realize that the uterus is the only human organ devoted to someone else, for someone else. All organs are for our bodies, except for the uterus, for women, of course. The uterus is made for a child, and every month it gets ready to take one in, whether the woman likes it or not. I mean, am I right? So even a woman's physiology has a component, if you want to call it that, that is not meant for her body. Now, there are some arguments worth addressing that are quite prevalent on the internet. The first is abortion in the case of rape or incest, and next, the problem of foster care and adoption. I'll address the first. This is perhaps the hardest question to deal with, but I believe my answer better cares for the woman's heart, and I'll explain why. First, I want to say that I am in no way trying to undermine the absolutely horrible act of rape and incest. It is an absolutely evil act, and I know that the victims have to live with it for the rest of their lives. If a pregnancy is a result of this act, then abortion is only going to make it worse. If a crime is committed, then why should an innocent third party be punished? This is like if a father commits a murder or assault, then the son or daughter is sentenced to death. I mean, even rapists are often not punished with death, which I think that is definitely unjust, but I suppose that is for a different discussion. Also, we recognize that rape is wrong because it is a stronger party assaulting, overpowering, and exploiting a weaker party. This is exactly what abortion is. It is a stronger party overpowering and exploiting a weaker party to the point of killing the weaker party. Also, abortion, because of rape or incest, only accounts for 1.5% of all abortions. So it doesn't logically follow that because of that, all abortions are justified. The thing is, whether a victim of rape or incest gets pregnant or not, the pain of that evil act will remain with her. Ending the life of the innocent party involved is not going to help. In fact, allowing it to live may be a way to have closure and move forward. Out of an absolutely evil and abhorrent act comes a human being who is vulnerable and defenseless, but capable of receiving every ounce of love you could give it. And allow me to speak candidly once again. I think that actually illustrates well how profound life is, how wonderful creating life is that when the act of creating life is perverted and used for evil ways, out of it can come something so beautiful as a young baby, as an infant. And not just the beauty of it, but even out of this perverted and evil act comes this beautiful baby that is capable of receiving so much love, a life, bringing a person who has the ability to impact the world, the society, the ability to make, or the possibility, the potential to make the lives that it would otherwise come into contact with better. I think that really gets to how beautiful life is that even out of an evil act, good and love can still come out of it. A second common objection is that because the adoption industry is in shambles, abortion should be legal. By the way, I'm not arguing that the adoption system is in shambles. It's just for the sake of argument. Maybe when I format the argument, you'll see the error. The argument could be stated like this. If abortion is illegal, then there will be more children in the foster care system. The foster care system is already weak, which means it negatively impacts the lives of the children a part of it. Adding more children to it will weaken it more, thus making the negative impacts on the children more severe. Therefore, abortion should be legal. This argument breaks the principle of double effect, which very, very basically states that bringing about a good can only be justified if it is brought about by an act that is either morally good, morally neutral, or by an act that is morally wrong but not proportionately worse than the good brought about. So murdering 1 million children a year is a consequence of not overwhelming the foster care system. The means are much worse than the ends, so it's not justifiable. Overwhelming the foster care system is a consequence of allowing 1 million more children to live a year. The means is not worse than the ends in this case, so it is justifiable. It's justifiable because it adheres to the principle of double effect due to the fact that overwhelming the foster care system is a moral wrong, but the consequence of the other option, killing 1 million unborn children a year, is worse. Simply put, the consequence, allowing 1 million more lives to be lived, would be a, say, plus 10. But the means, putting more pressure on the foster care system, would be a minus 4. But this is also equivocate or saying that you have to have one and the other. It's not going to be a direct impact. People say it will be, but there's no evidence to say that less abortions means a worse foster care system in the first place. But enough of the philosophy. When you make this argument about adoption, you're essentially saying that it's okay to take away the preborn children's chance at a decent life. Yeah, they may go into a weak foster care system, but at least they get a chance to live and a chance to make a life for themselves. But I want to pose a question. How come I don't see really any pro-abortion folks working to improve the adoption system? I would respect someone more if they were pro-abortion but worked to improve the adoption system in hopes that one day abortion wasn't necessary. I don't think that position would be right, but it's certainly more respectable. Also, there is a myth that pro-life people don't care about children after they're born, and this is simply not true. I'm going to give you a link to a tweet where a pro-choice person asks pro-lifers what they have personally done to care for lower-income single mothers, and I want you to read the replies to this tweet, and you may be astonished to hear what the pro-life community actually has done. Pause this podcast, check the replies to the tweet, and then come back, because I'm not finished. All right, great, you're back. Alabama, a state that has passed some of the harshest laws against abortion, has also been reporting record high numbers in adoption. So I think this is proof that more children predisposed to adoption doesn't necessarily mean more kids will not be adopted. I hope that made sense. I want to shift a little bit to look at the abortion industry for what it really is. A big point that pro-abortion advocates make is that having a child can significantly deter a woman's personal life. One problem of this is something I have already mentioned, which is that our society dismisses the real risk of becoming pregnant every time someone has sex. Our society exclaims to enjoy the act but not own up to the consequences. Not saying becoming pregnant is a negative consequence. Also, why does it suddenly become okay to murder an innocent child in the name of a career? When you are on your deathbed, are you going to be glad that you sacrificed your personal life for the bonus, for the prestige, or for the new job? And that question is gender neutral, by the way. You may ask, well, so many men leave women, setting them up for extreme difficulty to raise a child. Shouldn't you also advocate for men to stay with the women? Yes, I do. End of discussion. Also, what does abortion do for the father? What does abortion do for the father? It could put the father in severe heartache because they just lost their son or daughter. Because today's society says it's only the woman's choice. Or it could prop up men to practice more womanizing acts. A man can see a woman only for sex, and he could think, once I'm done with her, I don't need to stay because abortion is always an option. And then he can continue that way. I'm not saying that all men who support abortion think this way. All I'm saying is that that possibility exists. The pro-abortion advocates use language quite strategically in order to downplay what abortion really is. They use the term fetus to try to show that a preborn child is not equal in value to a born child, but fetus just means offspring in Latin, so it's useless. They also use the word choice. They also use the word choice. When a woman gets an abortion, she's exercising her, quote, choice, but she's really just allowing a doctor to murder her child. The word abortion itself is a euphemism too. Abortion just means termination, but the reality of it is it's intentionally ending the life of a preborn human. But it's not over until you get a picture of what abortion really is. I don't mean to gross you out. What I'm going to be describing might be disturbing, so here is your warning. I only bring this up because this is what exercising the, quote, right to choose looks like. Here's your warning. A description of surgical abortion is about to be made, so if you're uncomfortable, then please skip ahead. A first trimester abortion includes opening up the cervix and sticking in a vacuum that has 10 to 20 times the power of your household vacuum. The preborn baby, who at this point usually has arms and legs, a heartbeat, and some brain function, can't handle that amount of suction and is ripped apart and sucked down a tube about half the diameter of the hole you make with an OK sign. If you're watching on YouTube, you look at my hand, it's about that big. In the second trimester, the preborn baby can be about the length of your hand or taller. The most common form of abortion at this stage includes taking a 13-inch clamp with sharp teeth at the end, reaching inside, grabbing whatever the doctor can feel, pulling and twisting until usually an arm or a leg pops out. Experienced abortionists also know what the head feels like and can crush it relatively quickly. The body parts are assembled on a tray to make sure they have pieced back together a full body because they want to make sure they didn't miss anything. If they miss something, an infection can occur. Scraping the remaining parts can scar the uterus, which can significantly infringe on the possibility of the woman to have another child. At the third trimester, this baby can survive if a mother gives birth prematurely. The baby has an almost guaranteed survival. Allow me to start that over. At the third trimester, this baby can survive if a mother gives birth prematurely. The baby has an almost guaranteed survival at around 25 weeks. over 50% chance of survival at 22 weeks, and in some rare cases, 20-week-old babies, prematurely born babies, have survived. The third trimester is well into those weeks. Remember, the third trimester ends at 40 weeks typically. To abort a baby at this stage takes multiple days. On the first day, the baby is injected with a chemical that will cause it to have a heart attack and die. And by the way, the baby will feel it. These babies can feel pain. The woman then waits for a day or two after that and will usually go into labor. Sometimes the women can't make it to the facility, so they often give birth to their dead baby in a toilet, and the abortionist will come to clean it up. The risks after this procedure are more severe than in the second trimester. I got this information from Dr. Anthony Levatino, who has performed over 1,200 abortions, and one day decided to end the evil that he was doing and is now a pro-life advocate. These procedures, that's a woman's choice. What you just described, or what I just described, that's what exercising the right to choose looks like. That's her choice, okay? This is not to mention the fact that Planned Parenthood sells these children's body parts for profit. See the link below. I could go into the evils of Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics, but I don't think we have the time. Like I said, I respect your time. You can tell me that Planned Parenthood's business is only 3% of abortions, which is a total misdirection and lie, by the way. See the video below. No matter how many abortions they do, is too many. I don't care how much business it takes up. One last line of attack I'll deal with is, what about abortion if the child is threatening the mother's life? Well, the same doctor, Dr. Anthony Levatino, worked at a medical center that treated high-risk pregnancy. And he said that in the 9 years that he treated in the 9 years that he treated high-risk pregnancies, the number of times that he had to deliberately kill a baby to save the mother's life was 0. Dr. Levatino said that the vast majority of life-threatening situations occur around 24, 25, 26 or so weeks into the pregnancy. I've already explained that the survival rate is very high for those early births. Also, abortion for the mother's health, let me backtrack. This is to say that delivering the baby is the best option. Also, abortion for the mother's health, not for the sake of her life, but just her health, is tricky because it can be stretched. When a woman comes into a clinic and says she is feeling bad and it's not life-threatening, the doctor recognizes that the facility is going to get hundreds of dollars just from this one abortion. So the incentive to stretch the term health definitely exists. Levatino said that it is never necessary to intentionally end the life of the baby to save the woman's life. Now, some prematurely born children from these situations don't make it, but at least they had the chance. And in fact, most babies, in his experience, did make it. And that's my point. Even if I did grant that abortion was permissible in these scenarios, why can't it be a last resort? Also, even if this argument for abortion for the mother's life was legitimate, which it's not, it doesn't logically justify abortion for other reasons. If you want to watch the interview of Dr. Levatino that I got this information from, the link will be in the description. I hope now you have seen that a preborn baby is a life, that the mother and father are morally and legally obligated to, almost dropped my computer, are morally and legally obligated to at least carry the child to term. And I hope you have a better understanding of what abortion actually is. Look, don't call me a misogynist, don't call me a sexist, don't even try to call me names. Doing so without making an attempt to refute my arguments doesn't make me any more wrong. In fact, it only helps my position. Let me know where you think I went wrong. If I'm wrong, it should be easy to explain why I'm wrong. So try. Don't start with the name calling. We're adults. But most importantly, and this is the crux of it, I want to address the person who may be watching this video who has had an abortion. I don't know how many people will see this to where the odds are that someone who happens upon this video has had an abortion. If that's you listening right now who's had an abortion, I have some words for you. And hear me out. What you have done is wrong, and I think you know that in your heart. You have been told a lie by an industry that profits millions of dollars to kill innocent and defenseless unborn babies. It's okay. I'm here to tell you. There is reconciliation. An act like this makes you search for forgiveness, and it seems like it's nowhere to be found. But I'm here to tell you that the God of the universe loves you so much that he sent his only son, Jesus Christ, to pay for your sins, including the abortion. There is no guilt, there is no shame, no pain, no sin, no wrong too big that God can't forgive. Confess your sins to him and God will readily forgive you. He loves you so much, so much. If you are someone who has a hard time believing in God for whatever reason, then please, I urge you to reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation about it. If you don't know, I used to be an atheist, and I subjected Christianity to severe intellectual scrutiny, and I now believe it to be true. Ask me about it. I'd love to share it with you. If you need any sort of support for any reason, then feel free to reach out to me. I will plainly say that I'm not equipped by any means to handle someone in your shoes who has underwent an abortion, but I can tell you that I will try my absolute best to connect you with resources, including women that I do know that I have full trust and confidence in are equipped to handle that grief and to carry some of that burden with you. Don't be afraid to reach out. So to wrap up, start landing the plane. It's very hard for me to make this video. There are a lot of people that I know probably listening to this who are pro-choice. And the thing that makes it hard is that I do have a small platform, so it's likely the only people who listen to this are people who know me. I hope more people listen to it, but it's likely the only people that know me. And I know that this is such a hot button issue. And so it's not like a lot of pro-life advocates who do have fame to their name. So when they do make these pro-life arguments, they have that fame to kind of be a little buffer between them and the people that are listening. But for me, everyone who's listening, there's some sort of personal relationship. No matter how small it is, most likely there's some sort of personal relationship with me. And I recognize that this subjects that personal relationship to be broken. You may think very much differently of me now, but I only do this. I make this video. I proclaim this message only in hopes that someone who hears it may remember it if they are ever faced with the decision to have an abortion. And maybe someone who's listening to this can hear this and they've changed their mind on some things, and they can tell someone who is faced with that decision, that very hard decision, and a life might be saved. I don't do it because I hate people who are pro-choice, not at all. I don't do it for my own ego. Like I said, this video is already hard enough to make. I do it because the truth needs to be shared. I still love people who are pro-choice, and I still love people who have had abortions. I do so because God still loves you too, and more so than I or anyone else ever could. I've tried my best to provide links to my sources. They will be in the description below. I will also include additional content, such as women arguing for pro-life, and also Abby Johnson, a former top-ranking Planned Parenthood official, exposing what really happens at Planned Parenthood clinics. I encourage you to see for yourself. If you are pro-choice, or now were, my sincerest thanks to you for listening to this podcast, and I mean that. It is lost in our society to hear the other side out and think for ourselves. Rather, we often tend to let our group identity think for us. But by listening, you didn't do that. Even if you are still pro-choice and didn't change your mind at all, again, thank you so much for listening. If you have heard my arguments and find within your heart that they're right, but don't have it in your heart to change, it's okay. Today we feel like our beliefs are our identity. They're not. You might be thinking, I can't be a liberal if I become pro-life. I can't support women if I become pro-life. I'm here to tell you, you still can for all of those things. Again, thank you very much for listening. Take care.